In sterile, dimly lit chambers deep within the fortified silence of the Vatican, a flickering grayscale image appeared on a cathode-ray tube, allegedly capturing the agony of a man dying on a wooden cross 2 millennia ago. This was not a projection of faith or a masterpiece of Renaissance art, but a supposed capture of light waves harvested from the past, a visual echo of history reclaimed by a machine that defied the linear progression of time. The air in the room didn't carry the scent of incense, but the sharp ozone tang of high-voltage vacuum tubes and the hum of an invention that threatened to collapse the very foundation of human certainty. It was an impossible contradiction, the world's most ancient religious institution wielding a device that utilized the cutting-edge physics of the mid-20th century to peer through the veil of the ages. The question haunting the few witnesses present was no longer whether the past could be seen, but whether a world built on belief could survive the arrival of objective, recorded proof. The year was 1972, and the global landscape was fractured by the Cold War's technological race. Yet inside the Leonine Wall, a different kind of boundary was being policed. Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and respected authority on archaic music, sat at the center of a collaborative circle that included Nobel laureates. They had spent years developing the Chronovisor, a device predicated on the radical theory that every sound and sight emitted by a living being is never truly lost, but transformed into a form of energy that remains imprinted on the fabric of the universe. While the rest of the world looked toward the moon for the next frontier, this clandestine group looked backward, attempting to tune in to the transversal electromagnetic waves of history. The economic and social stakes were incomprehensible. If the past could be observed with the clarity of a newsreel, every political treaty, every religious dogma, and every national myth would be subject to immediate, cold-blooded verification. The Quantum Symphony. The silence of the Vatican's archives is not merely a lack of sound, but a heavy, deliberate insulation against the resonance of a discovery that threatened to turn history into a live broadcast. Ernetti theorized that human speech and action were permanent energetic imprints, like light from a distant star that continues to travel across the vacuum of space long after the star itself has died. The project was born from the cold industrial necessity of the post-war era, where the discovery of the atom redrew the lines between the spiritual and the physical. The team operated under a protocol of absolute compartmentalization, drawing on the expertise of figures who had already mastered the art of making the impossible tangible. They weren't building a time machine in the traditional sense. They were building a time viewer, a passive receiver designed to harvest the electromagnetic remnants of every word ever spoken. For the men standing in the shadows of the laboratory, the experience was a jarring descent into a sensory labyrinth. They spent 14-hour shifts surrounded by the rhythmic clicking of magnetic tape and the glowing warmth of hundreds of cathode valves. There was a specific, haunting texture to the audio they first retrieved, the distorted metallic echoes of voices that sounded like they were shouting through miles of water. They were captivated by the mundane reality of ancient life, the sound of a merchant arguing over the price of grain in a Roman market. This was the human lens that made the project so dangerous. It stripped away the grandeur of myth and replaced it with the raw, unpolished, and often disappointing reality of human existence. The turning point where the Chronovisor ceased to be an experimental curiosity occurred when the team successfully tuned the device to the year 169 BC, capturing a performance of a lost Roman tragedy. In a world with a Chronovisor, there is no debate, no mystery, and no faith, only data.
The Jesus photo crisis. The grain of the film was not polished, but a violent, flickering static that fought against being observed. In a cramped room, the 12 men watched as the snow coalesced into a human silhouette, slumped under a weight that transcended the physical. This was the moment the project moved from a scientific experiment to a theological catastrophe. The image that emerged was a face, gaunt, streaked with sweat and blood, eyes upward in profound agony. By 1972, the Jesus photo had leaked into the Italian magazine La Domenica della Corriere, sending a shockwave through global society. The economic and social stakes were no longer about curiosity, they were about the survival of institutional power. If this photograph was real, the Vatican held a monopoly on the ultimate truth. But the systemic escalation of this revelation brought an immediate defensive counterstrike. Critics pointed out that the miraculous image bore a striking resemblance to a wood carving by a Spanish artist. This was the intellectual trap. Was the machine truly seeing the past, or was it merely reflecting the deep-seated subconscious imagery of the men operating it? For Father Ernetti, the lived experience was one of rapid, isolating descent. He spoke of the sensory overload, how the machine didn't just show the crucifixion, but the mundane, terrifying sounds of the Roman crowd and the clinking of armor. The Vatican realized that the Chronovisor produced negative utility. It solved a mystery that the world needed to remain a mystery in order to function. Faith requires the absence of proof. The incentives shifted from discovery to erasure, and Ernetti was bound by an oath that equated his scientific testimony with spiritual treason. The final erasure. The cold, methodical erasure of the Chronovisor was a metal and acid bath. The hum of high-voltage transformers faded for the last time, replaced by the sterile scraping of metal as technicians disconnected the copper arrays. The Vatican did not just turn off a machine, it re-established the boundary between the seen and the unseen. By the late 1980s, the papal decree Lex Vigilanti allegedly updated to include the use of time-viewing devices as a ground for immediate excommunication, while the secular world raced toward an internet that promised to remember everything. The oldest institution on earth was perfecting the art of forgetting. The laboratory was scrubbed of its signature, leaving no physical evidence that the quantum symphony had ever been conducted. For Father Ernetti, the human cost was a slow descent into a living ghosthood. He spent his final years in a Venice monastery, a man whose mind was filled with high-definition sights of the Roman Empire, yet whose tongue was tied. He was a prisoner of his own memory. The structural shift was finalized in 1994 upon Ernetti's bedtime, where he reportedly spoke not of the machine's failure, but of its terrifying success. The machine was allegedly moved to Section 15 of the Apostolic Archive, a space that exists off the official maps. Today, the Chronovisor story remains a haunting, open loop. As we look back at the disputed images, we are forced to ask if we are truly seeking the light of the past, or if we are merely afraid of the dark that follows when that light is finally turned off. The machine is silent, but the questions it raised suggest the past is never truly gone. It is simply waiting for someone else to find the right dial.